Congresswoman and Democratic candidate for the 33rd Congressional District, Julie Johnson, thank you so much and welcome back to Eye on Politics.
Absolutely. Always great to be with you, Jack.
Nice to be with you. And so you made it to the runoff for the 33rd Congressional District. You came in second on March 3rd against former Congressman Allred. What are you doing to win this time?
You know, we're just working really hard. We're getting a lot of endorsements. A lot of people have reached out to engage with us, talking to the voters, running a ground game, doing all the things you do in a campaign, lots of media interviews, just being very present in the community, and we're getting so much support. We're really excited about our options.
And so let me ask you, what are you doing to court those who voted for Carlos Quintanilla and Zishan Hafiz, who are also in the race? And what is your overall message to voters on why they should return you to Congress, albeit in a slightly different district?
Well, you know, I think it's about highlighting our record. You know, Colin, Allred, and I have a very different record on immigration, for example. That's an issue that's very important to the voters of Zishan Hafiz and Carlos Quintanilla. We're getting a lot of their support as a result of that, and just really talking about his record versus my record. You know, he voted with ICE multiple occasions. I've consistently been against that, and that, given the time that we're in this country with immigration and his policies on that regard, that's an issue that's really resonating with a lot of folks.
I was going to ask you, what are the biggest contrasts between you and Allred? And you mentioned ICE. Can you be specific? And what is it that you sharply disagree with his past votes?
Well, sure. So there's a couple. It's long been the law of the land in this country that if you commit a crime, that you can be deported. We can revoke your permission to be here. And I fully support that. But what I don't support is eroding our due process, eroding our constitutional protections. What Republicans have been doing is saying, you know what, a conviction is no longer necessary, an allegation is enough. And so this concept that we all grew up with, innocent before proven guilty, that doesn't work in Colin Allred's world. So he voted for that because he took a hard right turn when he was running for the Senate. He voted, and I voted against that. And that is really significant to our Latino communities and our immigrant communities who are really fearful of what ICE is doing to them and their families. And secondly, it's about sanctuary cities. You know, Dallas police can make their decisions of they want to enter into a 287G cooperation agreement with ICE. They've not done that. Colin Allred was only one of 12 Democrats to vote to allow, you know, governments to punish these cities. And what we just saw recently this past week, right? Greg Abbott threatening to withhold hundreds of millions of dollars to Houston and Dallas to strong arm these police departments into doing this. And then Colin Allred supported that, you know, so I am against that. And I think that that's a clear marker difference between us and our actual voting records that I think voters are really resonating towards.
As you know, Allred has criticized your prior stock sales that included Palantir, which works with ICE. And so I'm wondering, what do you say to that? And do you think that hurt you the first time around on March 3rd?
You know, hard to know. You know, what I say to that is it's a false argument. You know, everyone knows I've had independent money managers. I immediately sold the Palantir stock when I became aware that we had it, and I made $90 on it. His representations that are absolutely false. He's lied about the whole process because he doesn't have a record to run on. He was in Congress for 6 years when we had a Democratic trifecta, a Democratic House, a Democratic Senate, and a Democratic president, and he couldn't pass anything. He was not effective during his time there. Otherwise, he would be touting all of these things that he achieved, that he accomplished while he was in Congress, and he didn't. All he could do is make a false manufactured claim against me because he doesn't have a positive record of his own.
Do you think ICE should be abolished, as some Democrats believe?
I have consistently voted for defunding ICE. I think the program, we need customs enforcement and immigration in this country. You can't just have no immigration policy. But I think ICE needs to be completely brought down to the beginnings and rebuilt into what it should be, which is a responsible immigration enforcement agency. Its current form, its current leadership, I do not support. I have voted against funding them every single time.
So gut it, but don't abolish it.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, it needs to be, we can't say that we're going to have an open border policy, we're not going to enforce immigration. Of course we're going to do that. But the way it's running, this discriminatory, bigoted, basis, horrific way that they're conducting their business should not be, and I will not give them one penny until they completely reform how they operate.
So let's talk about some of your other priorities. If you are reelected, what specific problems do you want to solve, and how would you do it?
Affordability is a key issue. Housing access is an important issue here in Dallas-Fort Worth. We're the fastest growing metropolitan area in the country. Housing is a real issue. I've talked to so many people who would like to be able to experience home ownership. So I have legislation designed to do just that, to make it possible. You know, it doesn't make any sense. You can pay your rent on time. You don't develop a credit rating and a history based on that under current law. So I have a simple bill just to allow renters to develop credit so that they can qualify for a mortgage. If you can demonstrate that you can pay, $1,500 a month in rent, that should be an example that you can pay a $1,500 mortgage payment. So addressing that, raising the minimum wage, we have to address that. Healthcare access. We lead the nation in uninsured people. We lead the nation in Black maternal mortality. We have got to address the healthcare crisis that we're facing here.
When you talk about raising the minimum wage, what idea do you have about that as far as specific number?
Well, I've signed on to legislation raising it to $20 an hour. I think, we have a working poor in this country where people are working 40 hours a week and they still qualify for benefits. We have to address that. There have been, 20-something states have minimum wages at about that, Republican states, Democratic states, and their economies are doing just fine. We have to do better here in Texas.
What was your reaction when you heard about the third attempted assassination of President Trump?
Oh, it's terrible. We can't have political violence. I don't agree with the president on virtually much of his policies, but that by definition does not mean that I want to see him have physical harm done to him. We have to tamp down this culture of political violence. We can't, it's just unacceptable. And it takes elected leaders and people from both sides of the aisles to strongly condemn it, and I strongly condemn that.
What should happen now with the war on Iran?
Well, according to President Trump this morning, we're done, it's over, something like that. It needs to de-escalate. We need to get back into negotiating and end a realistic end to where we can open the strait, get oil and gas flows going again. But we don't want a nuclearized Iran. We definitely, as a nation, have a vested interest to make sure that Iran is not a nuclearized power, and so we have to continue to work on it.
But how do you negotiate with Iran? They don't want to negotiate about nuclear weapons.
Obama had an Iran nuclear deal, so they had a negotiation that Trump blew up. So I think there's a lot of ways. Iran, they've suffered from this war too. They would like to, I think, see an end to it as well. And I think they've offered to come to the table on nuclear armaments and de-escalating in that space. We just have to get there and be really aggressive about our negotiations there.
But can you really trust Iran? I mean, they play games. I mean,
Of course, we have to approach that with an element of distrust. But that's what verification mechanisms are. We have that, across the globe in other contexts, and I think it can be done.
Redistricting. The Supreme Court finalized the Texas 2025 maps for this year's midterms, which is why you're running in a slightly different congressional district. But they also issued a ruling that further restricted the use of race when it comes to drawing congressional districts. What's your reaction on both of those?
I'm very disappointed to see the Supreme Court strike down the Voting Rights Act. The
Voting Rights Act is still in place.
Well, not effectively, based on the new burden of proof that you have to make in order to bring a claim. It renders it basically ineffective and unachievable to bring that the legal standard is so high that it effectively guts it. And so it's very disappointing. We have a lot of racism in this country. We have not achieved equality in this country. Women too, just look at it all. But, I'm disappointed in those results. I think we need to have majority opportunity districts. I think we need to have people have the right to elect candidates of their choice. I think that is all very necessary in our political process. And so obviously I fundamentally disagree with those rulings.
What's your biggest fear going forward
For me personally? Or?
on the ruling, as far as like long-term impact?
Well, obviously that, I think gerrymandering is very unhealthy in our political culture. I personally would love to see a federal, policy where we have independent redistricting across the board. It really panders to the extreme edges of of both political parties. I think governance needs to happen more from the middle, but it really will disenfranchise a lot of the vote, like what we saw in the earlier part of last century, and it's just really unhealthy. So I'm very concerned about that. I'm concerned that people are not going to vote because they're not going to feel like their vote matters, or they're not going to feel like they can make a difference in our system, and that's unhealthy for our governance. We really want people to have this perception that their participation in our democratic process can make a difference. We want everybody to be able to vote safely.
Some Democrats have said if they retake the House in January, that they want to impeach President Trump. Do you agree that that should be part of the Democrats' agenda?
I think it certainly needs to be on the table. I think he has recklessly endangered this country. His unhinged tweets about annihilating the entire country of humanity of Iran was so unhinged and irresponsible. What he's done with ICE and completely assaulting the constitutional protections of people in this country is outrageous. How he's handled the tariffs, the economy, he's consistently struck down. I think he's been, I think he's really derelicted his duty as commander in chief. And yes, I think that's something we should consider. However, we have to have the votes in the Senate. It needs to be a productive exercise. And so, we'll have to see about the timing of that and when it makes sense based on the electoral outcome.
So based on what you said, if, let's just say, for argument's sake, Democrats retake the House, Republicans hold on to the Senate, are you saying that they should not impeach the president if he's going to be acquitted in the Senate?
No, I'm not saying that at all.
Oh.
I'm saying that the timing of that might be different of when that process would take place. But I think the president needs to be held account for some of the reckless actions that he's done.
And some Democrats also want to add Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. as states. Is that something you agree with?
I haven't really thought about that. I'm certainly open to the arguments and we'll study it. I do think that with respect to D.C. statehood, we have people in this country that have no representation, and that's not who we are. And so I haven't thought about Puerto Rico yet.
And my last question to you is, some Democrats want to increase the number of justices on the U.S. Supreme Court. Where are you on that?
I think packing the court, there's arguments on both sides to that. Right now, I would probably be against that, but I don't have a firm position on that at this point.
Anything else you'd like to say?
Nope, just looking forward to Election Day.
All right, Congresswoman Julie Johnson, in the 32nd Congressional District and candidate for the 33rd Congressional District. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
We appreciate it.
Absolutely.